How do you catch a murderer when there are no witnesses, no obvious clues, and the crime scene has been seemingly wiped clean? No fingerprints, no DNA worth mentioning, not even a weapon, not even a confession. The answer might surprise you because sometimes justice doesn't come from what investigators see, but from what they almost ignore. Tonight, we're talking about silent witnesses, the microscopic, the overlooked, and the easily dismissed, such as the stray fiber, the dust that no one bothered to sweep up, the faint impression that didn't quite disappear. These are the details that whisper when everything else is screaming nothing else to see here. And in some of the most baffling murder cases on record, those whispers become the loudest testimony of all. There's something deeply unsettling about an unsolved murder. Not just because someone got away with it, but because it suggests that reality itself failed to leave a trail. Investigators are trained to look for the obvious: blood spatter, forced entry, defensive wounds, eyewitnesses, weapons. But what happens when all of that is missing? When the crime scene looks too clean? Historically, those are the cases that go cold. Boxes, they get sealed up. Evidence lockers collect dust. And families are left with questions that echo for decades. And here's the unfortunate truth. Sometimes those cases weren't unsolvable at all. The answers were there from the beginning. They were just small. So small that they didn't look like answers. So let's start with something you've probably brushed off your clothes 1,000 times without even thinking about it. Dust. In one real-world homicide, investigation detectives were stumped. A body was discovered indoors, no sign of a struggle, no clear cause of death at first glance. The victim's home showed no forced entry. Everyone with an obvious motive had airtight alibis. But during a secondary forensic review, a lab analyst noticed something strange in a vacuum sample taken from the victim's clothing. The dust wasn't normal household dust. It contained microscopic particles of fly ash and rare mineral residue that kind of only produces near a specific industrial facility that are like miles away from there. The victim never worked there, never even visited, but one person in their life had, and it was a coworker, someone who denied being anywhere near the victim that night. And when investigators compared dust samples from the suspect's vehicle and clothing, the match was unmistakable. That meaningless dust placed them right at the scene. There were no eyewitnesses and no confession, just particles small enough to float unnoticed until they didn't. And that's the thing about trace evidence. It doesn't lie. It doesn't forget. And it doesn't care how careful you think that you are. Take tire tracks. In another case, this time it was a hit-and-run homicide. The victim was struck late at night on a rural road. Rain pretty much washed away most physical evidence. There were no, again, cameras. There wasn't any witnesses. And investigators were ready to classify it as an unfortunate accident. Then someone noticed something barely visible in the mud along the shoulder. There was a partial tire impression. It was distorted and incomplete. Not enough for like a full tread match, not enough to excite anyone, except for one analyst who refused to let it go. Using advanced imaging and comparative databases, they identified the impression as a consistent with a limited production tire used on a specific model on a delivery van. There were only a few hundred that were registered in the region. That there narrowed the suspect pool dramatically. One of those vans had damage consistent with the collision. The driver, they had claimed they were home asleep, but that faint impression, the one that rain almost erased, became the foundation of a conviction. Sometimes justice survives by just millimeters. And these cases also highlight a modern forensic challenge, which is cross-contamination. Trace evidence is powerful, but it's fragile. A single fiber transferred by an ungloved hand, a shoe stepping where it shouldn't, or on a rushed scene. In the past, countless cases were compromised because investigators didn't yet understand how easily microscopic evidence could move. Today, crime scene preservation is almost surgical because now we know every scene is talking. You just have to avoid interpreting it the wrong way. Now let's talk about something even more deceptive than dust: fabric fibers. To the naked eye, they're nothing but a speck, piece of lint. But under a microscope, fibers are fingerprints. In one landmark case, investigators recovered a single unusual fiber from beneath a victim's fingernail. It wasn't cotton or wool, and it wasn't synthetic in the way most clothing is. It was a rare blended fiber, manufactured using a process employed by only one textile mill in the entire country. That mill produced fabric almost exclusively for high-end custom upholstery, not for clothing, but for furniture. Investigators followed the fiber trail to a furniture workshop, then to an employee who had access to the victim, and no documented alibi. The fibers connected the suspect to the struggle. No witnesses, no camera footage, just a thread, literally, that refused to stay silent. One of the most famous examples of the fiber evidence comes from a historical case often referred to as the lace killer. A murderer targeted victims across different locations with obvious connections. What tied the crimes together wasn't DNA. This was before modern profiling, but lace fibers. Microscopic analysis revealed identical lace fragments on multiple victims. That lace was traced to a specific small batch manufacturer. From there, investigators identified a limited number of buyers. One of them had suspicious gaps in their timelines. That detail, that lace, of all things, became the key that collapsed an entire facade. And it changed how forensic science viewed fiber evidence forever. Silent witnesses aren't always physical anymore, and sometimes they're digital and overlooked, such as smartwatches, fitness trackers, smart home devices. In multiple modern cases, suspects claimed they never left their home. Their bodies, they said otherwise. A fitness tracker recorded steps at 3:12 in the morning. A heart rate spikes during the estimated time of death. The smart door sensors opening when no one remembered to leave. In one investigation, a suspect's smartwatch contradicted their story down to the very last minute. They said they were asleep, but the data showed movement, an elevation change, and an increased heart rate consistent with physical exertion. The device became a witness that couldn't be intimidated or even confused. And here's the unsettling part. Most of these people, even you or I, forget that these devices are always watching, even when we think nothing is happening. The patterns that we don't see, such as phone location data, is another quiet truth teller. Not just GPS, but patterns. a phone that always stops pinging near one specific area, a device that mysteriously powers down at the same time every night. Individually, those details mean nothing, but together, they tell a story. And increasingly, investigators are learning to listen. The future of solving murder cases isn't louder interrogations or flashier tech. It's patience. It's teaching investigators to ask questions. What does not belong here? AI now helps sift through mountains and mountains of data, reanalyzing old evidence and finding correlations humans missed. Dust patterns, fiber databases, digital timelines, cold cases are being reopened not because of new witnesses, but because someone finally noticed something old, something small, and something everyone else had ignored. Here's the truth. We don't like to admit most crimes don't stay hidden. They just hide in places we don't think to look. Every murder leaves witnesses. Some of them just don't have voices. The dust, the fibers, the data logs, the impressions that almost vanish, they're always there. They're just waiting. So the next time you hear a case described as unsolvable, just remember this. Silence doesn't mean absence. Sometimes it means the truth is whispering. And we haven't learned how to listen yet, because in the end, the smallest details often tell the biggest stories. And those details? They're watching. I'm John. Thanks for listening.